Welcome back to the Afterword, a conversation about the future of words. We're glad to have Melanie Gordon and Blair Kennedy here with us to continue our conversations about the background stories around human connection. Why is it so vital and yet so difficult that we connect with each other? All right, on your website, Melanie, you share a quote from Archbishop Desmond Tutu. He said, "A person with Ubuntu is open and available to others, affirming of others, does not feel threatened that others are able and good, for he or she has a proper self-assurance that comes from knowing that he or she belongs in a greater whole and is diminished when others are humiliated or diminished, when others are tortured or oppressed." What's the goal and expectation of the Ubuntu Circle exercise?
So I think this is a very complicated answer. It could be, but here's what I'm going to say about this. Essentially, it is how we treat one another. It's about being able to find a way to treat each other with compassion, to know that behind every face, every day, is someone who has gone through something. And if we lead with compassion, if we learn how to do that, if we practice that, then no matter how someone walks into a room, comes into our space, sits around our table, we're ready to hear and be present for them. And what I love about this whole practice, Ubuntu means humanity. That's the essential word, humanity. And we're talking about humanity here. And when you think about the thought that we cannot be human except for through other humans, then what does that mean for how we learn about our own behavior as humans and how it impacts the human in front of us? And not just the humans in front of us, because what happens when these groups meet and is that there's a change, there's a shift in people who are in the groups, and they take that out into their own communities, as the teenagers used to say, into their friend groups. And those groups, because of what they've experienced in these circles, those groups begin to change because their behavior changes, because they start to see that, oh, maybe I've gotten this all wrong, or, oh, maybe I need to ask a different question of this person. And I think when we are able to do that, what we are deepening our relationship with one another within our community. And if you can deepen your relationship and respect the where people are, then when you end up having some type of conflict, you already have a deep relationship and better understand the person in front of you and what their story may be. And maybe as you're trying to figure out how to resolve this conflict, how to move to reconciliation, it's a little less stressful, a little easier, a little more understanding, a little more growth together than it would have been had you not had the opportunity to understand more about the people in your community.
I'm curious, Melanie, have you ever had a reluctant participant?
Well, it depends on what you mean by reluctant. So this is completely, there are a couple of things that I notice with the circles that I've facilitated. First of all, you have some people that are all in and they're just ready to share everything, right? Then you have people where the reluctance becomes, I'm not ready to share everything. Even though this is not really looking at tell us your secrets. It's not about telling secrets. It's about sharing stories. But sometimes when it becomes a little deeper, when the prompts are a little deeper, there are people who you can tell they stop. And literally you can see it in their body and everything. Their body changes. Their tone changes. And something in that space for them, they're not ready to go there, or they're trying to figure out something in their own heads. The other reluctance you see is people coming to this believing that it's something that they've experienced in other circles. I'm just going to come in, do this thing, we're done, do it this way. And they are kind of, I would call, reluctant to the process. They assume that this process is like any other process of coming together in a group and talking about whatever. But for the majority of people, come with open hearts. I just ask them to come with a compassionate heart and stay present for other people.
I love that. All right. So Ann Blair, all your research, all your background, how are you integrating the medical and scientific world with the social aspect of human connection? And what have been some of your observations?
So, as I mentioned in the last episode, we have instituted these Ubuntu groups here at the medical school. And when you look at it, so much of the work that we do in those groups is essential for good relationships between physicians and their patients. And so to me, it's helping them learn those skills of listening and compassion and empathy. So this is extracurricular, right? They don't have to do this. But for those that do, really bringing in those pieces to learn and really see that human in front of you. We try to do that in the classroom as well, but when you have 110 students, sometimes that can be a little bit difficult. So really looking at these ways to not only help our students, but also our faculty and staff, just because there is so much going on in healthcare right now. And how can we bring these people together and truly make them feel seen? Because that's just vitally important. And from all of these different aspects, because we know that communication and listening is deeply impactful for health outcomes of the patient. So if a patient feels like that they are listened to and that they are heard and that they can ask questions, then that allows them to better handle their own health and the issues that they have going on. So I've done this around the work with Melanie, but also I'm also the director of the Patient Engagement Studio. And our whole purpose is to put patients' perspectives into research studies, not as data points, but as co-investigators. So I have a whole cadre of about 90 patients around the country who have different health conditions who can work with research teams and give them the feedback on it, on the research study in whatever way it might be. Like, how I want people to join my study. Here's my flyer. What do you think? It could be as simple as that, all the way into, well, this is the analysis that we did. And how does this make sense to you as a patient? Whereas that's all great, but we also have to train those patients to get ready to give that feedback. So we do all that. And what the feedback I've been given by these, we call them patient experts because they're experts at being patients. What they tell us is that it changes the way they interact in the clinical environment when they have to go back to the doctor. So it's that connection and giving them some self-confidence and to be able to ask questions and feel listened to. So it's on multiple different levels that I've been doing this type of work. Lots of fun.
You're giving, we've used this word before in some of our other podcasts, agency.
Yes.
To your expert patients. And, especially if you have any chronic issues, you are your expert, but not necessarily feeling like you have agency.
Yep.
Is huge. So, wow. Awesome. Okay. I love the benefits of this.
Oh, I do too. There's just so many follow-up questions that I want to ask that are kind of not even really part of this topic now. You've introduced other things that kind of set the brain on fire, don't they? In the last few years, we've had a lot of interesting things happen. We've had a global pandemic, which has stripped away some veneer, and we've seen some really sharp ideological differences. We've seen the imbalance in people's access to technology and the difference that can make for folks. What has all that done to erode human connection? And is there a pathway to reverse the trend?
I think one thing that I see happening is polarization. A lot of what you're talking about has created quite a bit of polarization. You either are for me or against me. You either believe this way, you don't, or you don't. And how do we then look at that in between and all the beautiful stuff that's in between this side or that side, right? And I think part of it is exactly what we've been talking about, is taking the time with intentionality of sitting and being present for others, kind of getting outside of ourselves to better understand the other, whoever the other is. And I think that is one of the most powerful ways forward. And what I have seen is that in little ways, maybe not in huge ways, but that's okay. In little ways, I have seen where people who are on one end or the other, but are now exhausted because that takes a lot of energy to be at one end or the other of polarization. And they're exhausted. So they might be ready to say, okay, what is it that I can glean from opening up a little bit more to others? What's in our way, for sure, is that we're living in a world now that is kind of applauding the kind of behavior that separates us. And we have systems in place that lift that up and celebrate it, reward it. So it's up to those of us who are seeing this to continue to do, we're tired too, but to continue to do this work of helping people to see into what is the essence of being human, and how is my humanity bound up in your humanity, as Archbishop Tutu used to say. And I loved how he almost bounced when he said it. My humanity is bound up in your humanity. So being able to see this in a world that's very polarized.
And then adding on to that very polarization is also the quickness of the response time that people are able to do without this ability to pause. It's just like this automatic piece of, oh, I'm just going to jump on this and continue on the beating down of one individual or multiple individuals or different groups or whatever. And as Melanie was saying, it's celebrated in many circles. And I remember 2 years ago, there was a research paper that had come out, and it was talking about social media and professionalism in residents, in medical residents. And this group was destroyed on social media. The hashtag #MedBikini came out because one of the things they were saying was, if you were seen on your social media page in a bathing suit, then you're probably not acting professionally. But the thing was, that's not how we talk about science. Science, we should be having these open discussions about the merits and the problems with this paper. But no, they just got destroyed on Twitter. Versus having this very, we go into the academic place. Did they have some flaws in it? Yes. But did they base all of the methods of their study on 2 other papers that are still published? Yes. But their paper got retracted because of the social media furor. That did turn up maybe some issues. But I just don't understand why we have to go around attacking people like that versus having the conversation. And we are set up now to be reactionary versus taking those few moments to step back and go, what is it that could be leading to that? And really thinking through from different perspectives. And Ubuntu really helped me do that. Even I think I was already leaning that way, doing that, but it really helped me improve those skills as well.
Oh yeah, we spent a whole episode learning about social media and how people are canceled, and how social media kind of works, how the social media machine works to target individuals, sometimes in really upside down and backwards ways. So yeah, appreciate you sharing that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And, and in many cases, and what I'm hearing some of your stories, Melanie and Blair, is just that creates trauma. Okay. So when there's trauma, Ubuntu is not able to thrive, because I'm in my trauma mind, you're against me, right? So I'm not gonna even see you as a human. I'm in that place, right? So that just aggravates and raises the bar for more lack of human connection. So, again, it's such a vicious cycle, right? What you were sharing. So I'm glad that maybe, Melanie, we're seeing some small things chipping away a little bit at that. That's good. That's good. So are there other cultures and communities that have lessons to teach us about human connection? Because there's something about this, as we were talking to or in our first episode about, this is a survival. Why were there other cultures and communities that have lived beyond, this season? So what are some things that we can learn from others?
Well, the obvious one for me is Ubuntu philosophy, for sure. That's something to lean into and understand that this is a 1,000-year-old practice in communities of how people relate to one another. And there's also, with Aboriginal spirituality on the continent of Australia, something called Kenyini. And with Kenyini, everybody is responsible for everyone else. And what I love about Aboriginal spirituality in itself is connectedness is part of that. We're connected to each other. We're connected to the earth. The earth owns us, right? Is one of the things they say. And I think that's just beautiful. And I actually pulled a quote from an Aboriginal writer, Madruru, and it says, our spirituality is a oneness and an interconnectedness with all that lives and breathes, even with all that does not live and breathe. Mm. So we are just one with one another. And I remember when I would teach on Aboriginal spirituality to high school students, it was like this wonder for them. I mean, I just loved how they would look at this and go, hey, that's kind of cool. And then they'd want to study more and hear more. They became so interested in it. And I think it's because there's this gentleness and sweetness about how people are always part of the community. And this is with Ubuntu too. The two kind of go hand in hand. When someone strays, we bring them back, right? We don't give up on people. And that doesn't mean that when you do something that's problematic in the community, that you do not have to be responsible for it. But it means that we're never going to say to you, you cannot be a part of this community. We're going to help you do the work to come back into the community. And I just love that, not giving up on people.
Beautiful.
That's fantastic. Nicely put. And I really don't have much to add to that, because I think there are so many of these lessons that we can look at from all of these different communities. And I think there's lessons in pretty much every single one that we could look at, both good and bad, right? So it's really trying to discern. So we talked a little bit about social media and technology, and we kind of framed it in this negative way. but it can also be a great connector. So really looking at, especially because up until right before the pandemic, we moved up into Simpsonville. Just before that, we were living down in Gray Court in the middle of nowhere, right? I mean, we were on 70 acres. That's where my kids, their first years of school were. And technology allowed them to stay connected to their friends who didn't want to drive all the way down to exit number 10 on 385. So, because it was a long way and we would just drive our kids to school. But that really allowed my kids a connection to the outside world that they didn't necessarily get to see in other areas. And I think we see that with technology, that it does allow those connections, and you can build trust and you can have good, solid connections, even if you never meet in person, although there is a different piece that comes from being in person with people. I don't think we can completely discount the wonders of what technology is bringing us in this connection space that we wouldn't get otherwise. I mean, just thinking of the beginning of the pandemic and have a whole Zoom thing with all of my family who's all over the country, right? That's just not something that happens all that often. And we couldn't have done it 10 years ago. So it does allow for some real benefits there.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, you mentioned that phrase whole person health at the first episode. And I'm just thinking about even in the scientific community, we are still learning. We still have that. That is a community that we can continue to learn from. And I just appreciate that idea, that whole person health model. Appreciate that.
All right. Well, our very last question for you all. What's a metaphor to help us understand human connection?
This is a tough one for me.
Yes. When we were talking about this before, it's like, okay, what's metaphor again? It's like
you can do a simile. It's okay. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be a metaphor. Just a word picture.
Yeah, mine. I'll go ahead and share mine. So I wrote mine down so that I would not forget it. So for me, when I thought about human connection, tried to see something in my mind, it's like a group hug from your ancestors. I have all these pictures of my grandparents and great grandparents in my house, and there's something about still feeling connected to the ancestors who were, their lives, our lives are built on them and the foundations they laid.
Yeah, that's sweet.
So where I went with this is actually a little bit similar, and I'm glad that you brought up Aboriginal backgrounds too. So I think of the Native American groups that think of as spiders as the weavers of life. Spiders are these weavers. And so for me, when I think of human connection, I think of these wonderfully sweet spider webs that connect each and every person. And some of those connections are thicker and some are not quite, and are a little bit more fragile, that could just be touched just a smidge and it all can fall apart. So for me, it's that interwoven piece that you might see in those beautiful spider webs, even though I'm married to someone who doesn't like spiders. This is still the example I come up with. But that to me is what this human connection truly is finding those places where you can tug on that little piece and you can then pull that person in who you were connected to and strengthen it in some sort of way.
Beautiful. And we know that some spider webs are incredibly strong.
Yes.
That strength of connection is very strong.
Yes.
Good job.
When I think of spiders' webs, I think of Charlotte and writing her, right? Connecting with Wilbur.
Yes.
That's right. Yes.
She used words and brought the whole barnyard together.
Yes, exactly.
Greetings and salutations.
That's it. All right. Well, Ann Blair, where can folks learn more about your work or connect with you?
So 2 places. They can find me on Twitter at ABKLMT. They can also find out a little bit more about Patient Engagement Studio at www.sc ubuntu.edu/patient engagement studio, all one word.
Perfect. Thank you. And Melanie, how can people learn more about the circles and how to connect with you?
Yes, so there are two ways. One is through my website, which is dolovewalk.co. C-O. It's not com, but co. And the other is on Instagram, Do Love Walk Collective.
Thank you very much. I will be connecting with you all for sure. I've enjoyed this episode. I've learned so much.
Yeah, it's been great.
Next week, Amy will be wrapping up 2022.
Hard to believe. Look out.
I know. And 4 years of the podcast at this point. So we'll be reviewing some of our highlights.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So all of you who have been joining us at the table, this wonderful conversation, again, thank you to Melanie and Blair. It's been absolutely a delight. Love for you to continue to be part of the Afterword podcast. Become a subscriber. It does help us keep the conversations going. You can find us on Apple, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. And as always, remember, you are welcome at our table.